Money is on people's minds a lot, isn't it? I mean, even to the point where there's a lot of cliches about that. Like put your money where your mouth is, or follow the money, or show me the money, or your money's on your mind, isn't it? Things get people's attention. You can understand there's more than a kernel of truth to that because, well, people sometimes worry. They worry about, say, do I have enough money saved to cover our expenses? Do I have enough money to send the kids to college if they want to go, if they can get in? Do I have enough money to retire? I've got this health procedure coming up. Do I have enough to cover the part that insurance doesn't cover? It's on people's minds in very practical ways, isn't it? Isn't it? Can't deny that. So isn't it interesting then that we find Jesus, sitting outside, let's say outside the treasury, which you might think is a strange place for him to be. But then again, Jesus has a very different take on what's going on with the treasury too. Let's remember, by the way, that this, for the third consecutive weekend, we've got a reference, say, in Mark's Gospel, last week in the letter to the Hebrews, and the week before that in the letter in the book of Deuteronomy. Jesus is cautioning the people, well, in this case in the Gospel, Jesus is cautioning the people about their level of trust with their religious officials. Okay? The scribes, the Levites, people like that. The people don't trust them as much. They turn to Jesus instead. So here's Jesus by the treasury. And he's noticing that the rich are putting in large sums, some very ostentatiously so. But this one widow comes by and puts in 2 coins. Now you heard me proclaim it a moment ago, but I just want to draw attention to that. And you might be thinking, the disciples watched this, and Jesus said, she put in more than anybody else. And the disciples being the disciples, I mean, we're still getting into Mark's Gospel a bit. They're probably scratching their heads and stroking their beards. Hey, Jesus, what do you mean by that? And he explains to them that in her poverty, for her to give almost anything really takes away from what little she has. Whereas these rich people, they gave money away they may never miss. Who's making the commitment? Who's making the sacrifice? The poor widow. How about our first reading today, the first book of Kings? As we continue on our travelogue through ancient Palestine, ancient Israel, we have the prophet Elijah. He's traveling through Zarephath, and he encounters this widow. And he says to her, he asks her to feed him. And she remarks that she has so little for herself or her son. How could she possibly feed him? And he asks her, would you please feed me? And she does. And wouldn't you know, as Elisha the prophet foretold, the Lord blessed her. She had enough flour and enough oil in her jugs to feed herself and her son for the whole next year. She made a sacrifice for a stranger. She didn't know who the prophet was, but she relented to his requests and fed a hungry man. Isn't it interesting? So often when we think about how we serve God's people, and even talk about here things at church, sometimes we talk about things like time and talent and treasure. And for some folks, making a generous donation isn't really that much of a stretch. There are a lot of people who have been blessed with good resources. And we appreciate the generosity, but at the same time, sometimes it's that poor person who gives very, very little, but really amounts to more of their own ability to live than it does for the rich person. I guess it gets into, does the sacrifice we make, is it really a sacrifice we notice? I mean, as another person would say, hey, can you give till it hurts a little? Yeah, maybe the thing to do is not to talk about money in that same sense. How about the time? How about the talent? This widow in Zarephath, she gave from what little food they had. She had no idea it would be replaced. Here's someone probably who was wondering for herself and for her son, where's tomorrow's meal coming from? God provided, but she still made that choice to feed the prophet without knowing where the next things would come from. She was giving when it would hurt. Can we think about the ways in which we are, as God's people, we're called, let's say, just to encounter one another. And there are times when maybe we're in a hurry, or we're maybe have other things in our mind, we're a little impatient. Do we have time to stop and talk to someone who really needs just a few minutes of patience and care and listening and attention? That's a sacrifice, but it's a good sacrifice. It might hurt, but it is a good sacrifice. Do we find that someone is in need? They may be their home and they're not well. No one can help them. Someone might need a ride to the doctor. It's inconvenient. You weren't thinking of driving a Catskill today. You weren't thinking of going to the hospital in Hudson today. But you stop and you make that time. It changed your day. Yeah, I guess that sacrifice hurt. It mattered. But these are sacrifices that matter a lot. Like the widow at Zarephath, the woman at the temple, putting money into the treasury. The day-to-day sacrifices we are called to consider. We are called as we encounter our sisters and brothers who have varieties and depths of hungers, hurts, needs that all are in need of attention, all in need of healing. There are lots of ways for us to give. Time and talent and treasure. Maybe for each of us it's a different kind of combination, a different kind of matrix of where we have plenty to share that we'll never notice again, and where the commitment we make to one another really is a commitment that really kind of pushes us, stretches us, makes us feel a little pain too. But these are things that we do as Jesus would do. So often in the books of the Gospels, we see Jesus extending himself in ways that maybe most of us might sit back and say, wow, that's impressive. I could never do that. Maybe we need to question ourselves a little bit to see, really? Can we do that? Can we think about who we are as followers of Jesus and find ways to strive to follow his example, even when it hurts just a little bit?